I always knew I'd reach this point. The feeling of power in my hands is electrifying. After years of humiliation, the figures from my latest contract, $50 million, echo in my mind like a victory anthem. As those familiar faces, who scorned me for so long, watch my ascent, I finally reap the rewards of my blood, sweat, and tears. The irony of fate is delicious. They have to see me shine. I look out the window of my new office, a majestic space with views that stretch as far as the eye can see. They, the ones who used me as a stepping stone, are now drowning in the consequences of their selfish choices. I hear the whispers of my family, murmuring amongst themselves, divided between accusations and lamentations. They didn't realize their childish games would backfire. And now, the house that was sacred to them, where I was just a tool, a fend for yourself, is crumbling. While my brother cruised in his new car, his name gleaming in gold, I felt lost, but oh, how I won. That first achievement made me vibrate. I gained independence. An audacious project, born from my despair, now blossoms like a flower reborn from rubble. All those days of personal growth, hundreds of grueling hours of work, were finally paying off. Every negotiation, every time I said no, while fear still whispered in my heart. The memory of those bleak nights in the shadow-filled house propelled me forward. While they failed, I thrived, and it was delicious. The need for revenge intensified with each passing day. The terrified look on my family's faces when they hear of my success is the sustenance I needed to live. The degradation on their faces was clear. Pride had been replaced by a distant guilt, manifested in empty words. They no longer held power over me. Success shattered the chains binding me to their illusions, and I, now free, navigated the waters of ambition. The level of indignation in my soul reached monumental proportions. The humiliation I suffered at their hands, every laugh in my face, now transformed into fuel. It would be a sublime revenge, the sweetest possible. With each contract signed, each victory achieved, I would watch them rot in their own mediocrity. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the real battle was yet to come. A sudden chill ran down my spine. The idea of exposing their weaknesses to the world thrilled me. One day, they would receive what they deserved, utter humiliation. It would be a spectacle, and I would be the director of their downfall. They thought they could ignore me, look down and forget the invisible girl. But with every step I took, the shadows of their misdeeds grew thicker. I looked out the window once more, the city lights shimmering like promises of prosperity. I was ready. The stage was set, the audience was theirs, and every smile I wore would be a sharpened knife against them. The world was about to see how life unfolds and surprises. Justice would come, and I, the archetype of revenge, would be at the center of the spectacle. They had no idea what was coming. The first morning breeze was a harbinger of things to come. As the city awoke and the movement began to pulse like a racing heart, I felt the adrenaline coursing through my body. It was time to consolidate my victory and set the stage for my grand spectacle. This wasn't just about success. It was a chance to rewrite the narrative of a lifetime. With every step I took across the large conference room, a smirk formed on my face. This was my kingdom. My partners, who were once just faceless figures in a crowd, now seemed small compared to the strength I had cultivated. The respect I demanded was reflected in the expressions of those around me. They knew I was in control, and the taste of it was addictive. The past didn't define me. I had become the archetype of success. A notification on my phone interrupted my thoughts. A message from one of my contacts within the financial system. "We need to talk about your family." Blood pumped through my veins. What could they be up to? They were on the brink of ruin, and yet they dared to move in the shadows. The idea that they could still cause damage to my trajectory was unbearable. Without hesitation, I answered. "I hear things are falling apart. Your siblings are having financial trouble, and your parents." "Well, they're teetering on the edge," the voice on the other end said. After so many years of being ignored, now it was their turn to sink. I couldn't help a malicious smile. This is exactly what they deserve, I thought. Every tear I shed, every "fend for yourself" I heard, crystallized in that call. They had to learn their lesson, and I would be the merciless teacher. In the days that followed, my focus was on a single objective: orchestrating the humiliation that awaited them. Their every move was being watched. I set out to assemble the pieces of the puzzle and expose their flaws, like unearthing a buried corpse. As they squirmed in their lies, I began to orchestrate my next strike. The contracts and new businesses were merely costumes I wore to conceal my true intentions. I made sure to involve the media, to be seen and heard, and the more people witnessed my ascent, the more I fueled myself on the bitter nostalgia they'd never suspect still haunted me. As soon as the company became the market's new sensation, I fueled rumors surrounding what truly transpired within the bowels of my former family. "Did you know your sister is thriving while your family crumbles?" the newspapers proclaimed. The pressure was mounting. My siblings tried, begging for help, but I refused. Instead, I severed their last ties to the business world and unlinked their debt from my name. A win-win situation for me. They were merely a trophy to me, a reminder of the pain I carried. I'm tired of hearing the whispers that families should always stick together. There was never any unity in the pain I experienced. Now, I could ardently watch them pay. The city's premier expo was fast approaching, and I basked in the attention. The media was relentless. Photographs and interviews were shared everywhere. Increasingly, comments and publications recalled how they'd underestimated me, unwittingly contributing to my revenge. Those who once dismissed me were now forced to witness my glory, and with it, I felt stronger with each passing second. A week before the expo, as the city prepared for the festivities, I decided the time for my move was now. I sent invitations to all my family members, as if they were being summoned to a grand event. And they were, apathetic and still mired in their own misfortunes. They agreed to attend. They couldn't miss it. The day of the expo arrived. In a dress that commanded attention, I felt like a queen. As the first guests began to arrive, I spotted my parents and siblings in a corner, nervous and awkward. My heart pounded with anticipation. It was time to finally reveal the truth. The speeches were a well-planned strategy. First, I thanked everyone for being there to share this journey with me, highlighting how important they had been in my life. Then, with exquisite skill, I mentioned the hardships I'd overcome. A few fake tears began to roll down my face, just a part of my plan. However, what followed would be pure art. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the choices I had to make. A dramatic pause. Choices that didn't include my family's help. I faced the world alone, as I always have. The murmurs began. The debts of one of my brothers, the bankruptcy of another. Last I heard, my family was sinking in trouble. So, if I'm here today, it's because I chose not to be with those who broke me. The word broke hung in the air like a dagger. Their eyes met, emotions overflowing on their faces, and the thrill of revenge offered me a pleasure I never knew existed. I felt a burgeoning power, almost capable of touching the clouds. They were in shock. The audience around me was ecstatic. The gleam in people's eyes made me immerse myself in this sea of vengeance, and I knew the show was only just beginning. The silence in the room was deafening. My family's faces were frozen in a mixture of astonishment and shame as I allowed myself to experience the climax of my revenge under the full glare of the spotlight. The excitement of the audience around me was palpable, as if all the guests were breathing the same electric anticipation as I was. The ground beneath their feet was crumbling, and it was time to dig even deeper. "We know life teaches us hard lessons," I continued, sketching a slight smile, as if I genuinely cared about my speech. "But the true lessons lie in the choices we make, and unfortunately, the choices you made were to bury yourselves." Each word was like a blow, a punch to their stomachs. I was merciless, and the adrenaline made me ultra-effective. Suddenly, one of my sisters stood up, attempting to interrupt, though her voice trembled. "You don't understand. We—" Her courage seemed so pathetic now. She was nothing compared to the fortress that pain had forged in me. "I understand far more than you can imagine," I cut in, my voice firm and icy. "I understand that you weren't there when I needed you. You never were." The shocked gazes of the audience turned to her, and the tone of disbelief reverberated through all the walls. The tears I had previously had to suppress now welled up, but this time they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of triumph and relief. "You forgot about me, but this stage is bigger than you can imagine. My business is soaring, and yours is plummeting." My brothers exchanged nervous glances. They must have been terrified, and that's exactly what I wanted. With each word, I not only planted a seed of guilt and embarrassment, but a subtle poison, which would spread through them all. The audience absorbed it, as if they were watching a tragicomic spectacle. What had been a celebration of my success had become a trial of their failures, a live show where they were the protagonists of a story I now controlled. How could a family like this let one of their own fall into despair for so long? I asked, raising my voice to emphasize my indignation. "It's not me who's losing everything, it's you. The mark of failure is the only thing you've left as a legacy." The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The sparse applause from the audience began to echo in the room, and my confidence grew exponentially. It was time for the final blow. I needed everyone to know the truth. With a calculated move, I paused dramatically and looked at the large screen behind me. The image of my brother's bank account, one that had been exposed, the result of meticulous research I'd conducted, the debt spiraling wildly for all to see, began to flicker. This is what really happens when you ignore the potential and courage of a family member. This is your reality, while you scorned me. My family's faces went pale. The audience was in shock, and that's exactly what I'd hoped for. In the shadows of the room, I could almost hear each of their moral bruises expanding. The taste of the venom I'd injected began to permeate not only their hearts but also the room's dynamics. Each spectator became both part of the scene and an observer of an empire's fall. "This is the real pain," I declared, letting a heavy silence fall over the room. "It's knowing that the love you expected in a family is just a facade, a beautifully crafted fairy tale draped over the dark reality that is this family." Eyes darted between them, as if the truths I exposed were there, for all to see, stripped bare of any mask. "I'm here today to show that forgiveness is unattainable when you're ignored and left behind." With each word, I tightened the noose. The murmurs in the crowd grew in intensity, and my anticipation turned to satisfaction. I was dancing on the line between rage and euphoria, and the flickering screen behind me continued to project their bankruptcies, portraying the fragments of a life they'd shaped in the shadows. Each image was a knife plunged into their memories. When the commotion in the room finally subsided and silence settled again, I took a deep breath. The energy was flowing, fermenting my results. The true story is always told by the victor, and I am the victor. That was my final word, and with it, my gaze locked onto my family's cold eyes. They were now bereft of any disguise. I saw indignation mixed with fragility on their faces. I had conquered that moment. And in that triumph, I learned a lesson. The power of truth is immeasurable, and either they would rise to change or they would sink further into their own mistakes. With a confident and satisfied smile, I left the stage, leaving them in their agony. The scene that unfolded was my most vibrant painting, and the audience, a living testament to my triumph. The real revenge was only just beginning, and I was just beginning to plot my next moves. At the height of my victory, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. I had laid the raw truth on the table, exposing everything my family had tried to hide in the shadows for so long. As I left the stage, Adrenaline still pulsed through my veins, like sparkling wine dancing and swirling in a perfect glass. Every murmur that resonated among the guests sounded like music to my ears. The confused and incredulous expressions of my relatives were like harvests from the field. Revenge had an unparalleled taste. But as soon as I went through the side door, I sought a moment of quiet. I looked in the mirror. The woman there was a version of myself I would never have imagined years ago. The pain, the disappointments, the tears had transformed into power. I had faced humiliation, but the cycle had changed. Now I was in control. As I composed myself, a message popped up on my phone. It was from my older brother. My heart pounded. "We need to talk. You need to understand the truth." I laughed, a laugh that echoed hollowly in the walls. The truth? The truth was reflected in the pain I saw in his eyes. What did he think he could tell me that I didn't already know? But curiosity was a flame to be fueled. "Right now? You don't have anything left to tell me that I don't already know. How about a conversation after you pay your debts?" I replied, my finger gliding across the screen with burning certainty. The immediacy of my action reflected not only the indifference I felt, but also the growing satisfaction of victory. I began to plan my next move. Time had shaped the battle, and each moment gave more strength to my decision not to back down. In the days that followed, the frenzy of my exposé took hold. I used social media, gave interviews, appeared on television shows. My family's name frequently became a topic in the media, and the irony left me ecstatic. They, who had always been known as a family of high values and achievements, were now facing the reality I knew to be true, illuminating their failures instead of their triumphs. I was outlining the new chapter of my story and at the same time writing their epilogue. One morning, while reviewing the coverage of my party online, I saw a post that stopped me in my tracks. It was an image of a family gathering in an old black and white photo. Next to it, the caption associated the image with the exemplification of hypocrisy, mentioning that many were now lost memories. It was a direct provocation, and my heart pounded. They were acknowledging the inevitable. With a sly smile, I decided it was time for payback. I needed to orchestrate a new attack. It would be an event that would leave an indelible mark not only on my past, but also on their faces, contorted with shame. Their downfall would become another performance, a scar that would force questions at every future encounter. The next big gala I would host wouldn't just be a party, it would be an exhibition, my trophy. The following week, I decided to schedule the new gala, but this time with a specific theme: the new chapter. I invited new investors, new partners, and of course, my family members, who had essentially become supporting players in my narrative. With a touch of irony, I made sure to personalize the invitations, each one in an elegant envelope adorned with gold and a touch of exquisite detail. The elegance contrasted absurdly with the lack of dignity they carried. The event arrived, and as the guests began to arrive in luxurious attire, I watched them from the doorway, anxious. My thoughts swirled about what was to come. When I finally saw them, they wore expressions of astonishment and confusion, shadowy figures of ghosts who had long been silenced. Every step they took toward the room was a journey through their own memories, and I was ready to capitalize on that. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the premiere of my new chapter," I clapped, and the lights went out. A screen rose behind me, filled with photos of triumph and old family pictures. I didn't hesitate to highlight the irony. They were no longer happy memories, but witnesses to the failure of a structure that was never genuine. Today is a day that acknowledges where we stand and where true strength resides, and it's not with you, my dears, it's with me. Laughter echoed through the walls, and I wrote a new episode. The beginning of my rebirth was blossoming before everyone. The expressions on their faces shifted to varying degrees of mortification. I reveled in every detail. It was a grand spectacle, but the real reason was the compassionate anticipation. With each projection, each laugh, each wound opened, I remained firm. That night was mine, and once again, they were about to be left behind. The attention I now commanded was powerful, and with it came the certainty that my success was undeniable. For them, the darkness would become a forgotten season in time, while I continued to ascend. If they still thought their word could illuminate the story, they were sorely mistaken. I wouldn't have to worry about the future. Mine was promising and would be recognized. When the new chapter became far more visible than the old one, the final division would be complete. With each poignant speech I delivered, I made it clear that past grievances were no longer the distortions they thought them to be. I was stronger and wiser now. Life had made me so. They were again silenced, trapped under the immense pressure of their own weaknesses. Gradually, murmurs began to rise among the audience. The recognition of my victory was palpable in the air. This was my moment, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that my name would become synonymous with strength and overcoming adversity, not only in my life, but in the lives of all those who had one day found themselves oppressed by the lies and illusions of the past. Each clap of applause echoed the certainty that my revenge was not just personal, but a tyranny against those who thought they could keep me under control forever. And so, as the lights shone brightly, the shadows of my family became merely a distant memory. The spectacle was only just beginning, and dear diary, I was only beginning to write my story. The echoes of applause still resonated in my ears as I left the stage, and the feeling of triumph was thick in the air. Every guest I crossed seemed like a latent emblem of my influence and my newly discovered power. The bewildered look on my family's faces gave me a profound pleasure, and at the same time, a chill down my spine. What would happen now? Would they do something to try to reverse this tide? Their show was over, but my story was about to gain a new volume. The night continued in a frenzy of laughter and lively conversations, but my spirit was in a state of focused excitement. I had to maintain control, order. With a slight smile on my face, I joined new allies, business colleagues who were intrigued by my meteoric rise. But amidst the euphoria, I knew my heart still held a space reserved for vengeance. Each of them was still a piece on my chessboard, and I was only beginning to set up the game. When the party reached its peak, I decided it was time to unleash my next plan. With a subtle gesture, I summoned my assistant. "Prepare everything for the press conference next week," I ordered. The idea of bringing the media back to the center of my game ignited every part of me. They were almost forgotten. Now it was time to rekindle the flames. In the days that followed, my image solidified in magazine pages and trending social media posts. Major outlets were eager to cover my trajectory, and the story of my family plummeting into ruin became more interesting than my ascent. Reporting on what could be a financial and emotional divorce was a feast for the press. Everything was aligned. I was now the center of attention, and the more they talked about them, the stronger I became. The press conference. In Tilo Hotel Ballroom, morning. A sea of photographers and reporters greeted me, the kind of scene that thrived on a glamour I hadn't enjoyed in a long time. With each flash, I felt a surge of power. Orchestrating events of this magnitude was an art, and I felt like the true artist. As I settled into my seat at the head table, I surveyed the audience. Most had no idea what was about to unfold. They still saw me as a rising entrepreneur, not the femme fatale I'd become. Yet the energy in the room thrummed around me, and I was about to unleash the devastating truth. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice modulated with a confidence that was hard to ignore. "Today I'm here to talk about my journey and the impact difficult choices can have on a family." I saw eyes widen. The words were well rehearsed, but with each syllable, I felt the consequences of the story being revealed. Despite outward success, the real struggle is often invisible, I continued, pausing for effect. And I am living proof of how one person can rewrite their narrative, even when everyone around them is drowning in their own lies. A murmur rippled through the room, and satisfaction consumed me. A new presentation unfolded on the screen behind me. Growth charts, positive reviews, and, in stark contrast, flashing headlines about my family's bankruptcy. What was more powerful than any words? The evidence. It spoke volumes, amplifying the pain my relatives were experiencing. Moving from one image to the next, I saw my siblings' faces, my parents, the expressions of loss laid bare in real time. The effect was agonizing. A dagger plunged into each of them. Cameras flashed around me, revealing their vulnerability, exposed in my moment of glory. In that room, heavy with anticipation, my siblings tried to maintain composure, but it wasn't easy. My father's shame-faced look was a work of art I needed to capture, a symbol of the patriarchy that had failed to protect its lineage. The small part they played only contributed to their own downfall. Our family could have been a story of redemption, but it became a tangled mess of selfishness and apathy, I declared, growing more aggressive with each sentence. The audience was completely captivated, and I savored every moment. After a series of questions from journalists seeking to understand the situation better, I paused. What I was about to reveal would define more than our family structure. It was the cavitation of truth. I want to talk about how I not only rewrote my destiny, but also how some in my family became the real babies. The consequences of a single person can ruin a legacy. And then, reveling in my own eloquence, I planted the seed of doubt. How many times has the world seen those who had every opportunity and still failed miserably? I'm not the only one destroying what was operating in plain sight. I saw a look of dawning understanding on one reporter's face. He clearly grasped the essence of what I meant, each word meticulously weighted. Why is the family never held accountable? I challenged, gesturing towards one of my siblings. They were now desperately on the defensive, and it was delicious to watch. The assembly, noticing the negative focus, made their shrinking even more rewarding. We all know the truth can be painful, but that pain is nothing compared to the relief I feel now, I concluded. The audience was in a state of shock. I waited a few moments, giving the truth time to sink in. As I finally left the stage, the intense buzz reminded me that I had turned the tide in my favor. The press conference not only solidified my status as a powerhouse in the business world, but cast a dark cloud over what had been a considerable family facade. However, the real impetus was only just beginning. As I left the building, I received a text. It was my brother again, pleading for a conversation. "You don't know what you're doing," the text read. Smiling to myself, I already had a response in mind. "I want you to find out," I typed back. "The consequences are yours." I had set in motion the chain of events that would determine the final game. They were merely pieces on a chessboard, and the only ones that mattered were the ones I moved. And such were the rules of my life. In this new phase, all eyes were on me, as the devastating downfall of my family reflected the truth. The story that mattered was the one of success, the one I was always destined for. Revenge became more than a desire. It became a fulfillment. In the days that followed, I prepared the next steps. They would know exactly where they stood. These weren't just mistakes. It was a sequence of utterly flawed decisions, and I would be a leader the world would never forget. What was written on the page could never be erased, but I possessed an eternal power, the ability to write my new narrative. The stage had changed, and now I was the star of the show. The hours following the press conference flew by, but the adrenaline still coursed through my body. Expressions of support and outrage were trending on social media, as my image solidified as a symbol of triumph over familial oppression. It was a power play, and finally, I was in the spotlight. But the real battle was yet to come. While reviewing news reports in my office, my phone buzzed with another message from my brother. "Please, we need to talk." My finger hesitated over the screen before I tapped the keys and typed, "I'm available. But remember, your mistakes can't be fixed with words alone." Send. The message drew a line between the past and the future. I went further, and for the first time, he had to face the consequences of his actions. Days passed. The media continued buzzing about my family situation, and investigations intensified. I began to feel that behind the cameras and glamour of my rise, a dark space was writhing, waiting for the right moment to emerge. This was the turning point of the story, and I still needed to shape it, to steer everything in a new direction. I decided to create an even grander event, an epic launch show to present my new project, capitalizing on all the media attention. The Consequences of Truth was the name I chose. I wanted to be armed to the teeth. The truth would once again emerge, but this time there would be no limit to my determination. I devised something special, a multimedia presentation that would not only celebrate my successes, but also reveal my family's catastrophic failures. With a theatrical touch, I planned a large backdrop that would expose cries of pain, the contrast of colors, and bold lettering highlighting their mistakes. Both personal and financial, their shattered legacy would bring to light not only the tears, but the excruciating pain they had inflicted over the years. The night of the event arrived. I was already dressed in a stunning gown, a color that captured the light and reflected my radiant spirit. Before leaving, I paused in front of the mirror, admiring every detail. This was my moment, and no one could steal that from me. I didn't just have the look of vengeance, I was a monument to it. The venue was packed. It wasn't just a gala, it was a trap. The lights shone brightly, and the audience was excited. Acquaintances, investors, and of course my family members sat in the front row. Casualties of the past would surface once more, and I longed to see my brother's expression as I revealed details he believed were lost secrets. I began the speech politely, thanking everyone who came to support me, but at the same time, I made it clear that this night would be a watershed moment, a catastrophe. We all have a past that shapes who we are, and my story is one I hope never repeats, but must be remembered, I declared. Eyes darted between family members. I saw nervousness in my parents' expressions, while my brothers grew colder. The panels lit up. On the screen, images of personal achievements alternated with images of my family in moments of despair. The first image that appeared was that of a house with a for sale sign that quickly faded into a graph showing the deep financial cuts they were facing. The contrast was shocking. The audience began to murmur, and tension mounted like a storm. These are my family members, and this is the truth. Those who were supposed to be my pillars became the stumbling blocks that haunted me for years, I continued, seeing my brother's desperate gaze intensify. He was panicking, and it fueled me. While a part of me, a familial instinct, tried to pull him back, another part reveled in an insatiable triumph. This was exact retribution. They expected love and support, but what I received was indifference. Now I do what was necessary, expose the truth to those who always remained in the shadows. The audience was silent, absorbing the latent truth that had always been masked by their hypocrisy. When images of the bankruptcy began to flash, there was an outcry, a mixture of compassion and revulsion. My parents, previously seeming unreal, now looked as vulnerable as ever. My expression grew firmer as I pursued my goals. Each graphic became a bigger uproar, and, culminating it all, came the evidence of yet another secret, the long-buried financial scandal. Here is the sum of their failures, the share of a deal that could have saved their lives. Instead, they chose contempt, betrayal, and abandonment. People who should have supported each other became mere spectators of their own destruction. Images of blank documents and unpaid bills filled the screen. Selfishness, abandonment, despair. These were the words that dominated the atmosphere. The room breathed under the pressure of intertwined deep feelings. The clamor intensified as I spoke. This is the true mark of the fall. They needed to know, and now everyone here is aware of what they made of my life. What should have been a celebration of my success transformed into a court of truth, where I was the judge. I savored each emotion, relishing my brother's anguish that now turned into discretion. He rose but hesitated. I saw there, in that vulnerability, the nonverbal confession of much that he couldn't deny. I pressed on, increasing the intensity like a symphony, as protesting voices were unable to change the audience's energy. Sometimes you need to break to rise better. You, as a family, failed to support me, but now I've transformed pain into strength. A storm of applause filled the room, and my victory was palpable. The event neared its end, but not before one final, devastating blow. I turned to the audience, their expressions a mixture of awe and pity for my family. Please remember, this isn't a shadow I'm avoiding. This is the truth, right here, and everyone here is a witness to this turning point. I hope you'll never forget. The image of my family, now shattered with grief, as I basked in the spotlight, would become the final scene of a spectacle that was now pure art. It exposed the hypocrisy that preceded my success. The night hadn't lost its meaning. This was a call to action. It was transformation and liberation. I saw there, in that vulnerability, the nonverbal confession of much that he couldn't deny. I pressed on, increasing the intensity like a symphony, as protesting voices were unable to change the audience's energy. Sometimes you need to break to rise better. You, as a family, failed to support me, but now I've transformed pain into strength. A storm of applause filled the room, and my victory was palpable. The event neared its end, but not before one final, devastating blow. I turned to the audience, their expressions a mixture of awe and pity for my family. Please remember, this isn't a shadow I'm avoiding. This is the truth, right here, and everyone here is a witness to this turning point. I hope you'll never forget. The image of my family, now shattered with grief, as I basked in the spotlight, would become the final scene of a spectacle that was now pure art. It exposed the hypocrisy that preceded my success. The night hadn't lost its meaning. This was a call to action. It was transformation and liberation.